Today's adventure takes me to Forest Park and Forst Home Cemetery. Now, I was here before last year, but this cemetery is so massive. I think it has about 100,000 graves here that I missed a lot of stuff. So today, I brought in an expert. Today I have Amy with me here from the Forest Park Historical Society.
Historical Society
of Forest Park. I knew I was going to screw that up. So Amy gives a lot of tours here. And tell me a little history of the cemetery and some of the tours you might be giving.
Well, you picked an awesome cemetery, awesome area to come to. Forest Park was in the Guinness World Book of Records for having more dead than alive. I believe, somebody's going to have to fact check me, but the ratio of dead to alive is 57-1 in Forest Park. The reason why there's so many cemeteries here is back in the prehistoric age, there's a geological feature here. There used to be an inland lake, Lake Chicago, and the shore was here. And also when the glaciers came through, it left a mound of gravel and sand. So this area was raised above what could be the soggy prairie. So it was a perfect area for Native Americans. We've known that people have lived here probably since 3500 BCE. And there were, at one point, extensive burial mounds here, which were unfortunately excavated. There, as in your other video, you went and visited the one that was remaining.
Yep.
But this land at first was after the Potawatomi, it was a Potawatomi village. When after the Black Hawk War, the Potawatomi were moved west. And a French trapper lived here with his wife. She was a Potawatomi woman. Then it was bought by a German farmer, Ferdinand Haas, and he was not such a great farmer. And so as he was sadly excavating the area, including the burial mounds, he uncovered a lot of artifacts. Some he didn't treat very well. Some that were preserved. At first they were at the library, now they're at a Potawatomi museum. But when he was excavating, he gave the gravel and sand to the railroad so that they would bring a line out here. And then since there was a line out here, his friend said, hey, you've got this great property, what if you had a picnic area? So it became a very popular German picnic area. They'd come out and drink beer. It was so popular they had to build their own jail. Then, I don't know if you've covered this in one of your videos, but Chicago used to have the city cemetery where Lincoln Park is now. Mm-hmm. And so they had to close that. It was a huge mess. It was a big ordeal to move those bodies. And so they needed places for new cemeteries. So here it's dry, the railroad comes out here. So Ferdinand sold off his land to cemeteries. The first chunk he sold off was north of here. And if you go there to Concordia, it's a Lutheran cemetery, a lot of Eastland disaster people there. But in a Lutheran cemetery, you cannot put your fraternal organization emblems on your headstones. So there was a lot of Germans who were progressive, a little bit more radical. They wanted an open cemetery. So this became Waldheim, non-denominational, open to all races. You could put if you belong to the Masons, you could put, that Mason symbol on your grave. And then just a little bit further south of here, then the English-speaking residents of Forest Park wanted a cemetery. That was Forst Home. In the 1960s, they combined. That's why it's all called Forst Home. I think that's it in a nutshell.
That's a lot of history. Definitely a lot of history. All right, thank you for that history, and you're going to give us a tour today. I
am, and then I'm just going to give a plug for the Historical Society of Forest Park. They've got a great website, a lot more information on the cemetery. I give a tour of, and we're going to visit it, the Haymarket Martyrs Monument in Radical Row the first Saturday of every month, May through October. I give a tour of just that area. And then once a year, I give a bike tour of the whole cemetery. That changes every year, so you'd have to look at the website. And then the Boy Scouts of Forest Park have just started their own tours that I'm helping them get started. So you'd have to look online to find that.
Awesome. That's great. All right, let's take a tour. Okay, so Amy, tell us about the first grave we're coming on here.
All right, so this is Adam, also known as Frank Heyer. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He had other aliases, Frank Schneider, also the last name of Hayes. He was a gangster, so he lived from 1889 to 1929. He was an accountant for the Moran mob. He was the leaseholder of the garage where the St. Valentine's Day massacre occurred. According to the autopsy, there were 15 bullets in his body and $1,300 in cash in his pockets.
Wow.
Supposedly his dog, whose name was Highball, which is what a great name for a dog.
Yeah.
Apparently the poor dog was in the garage during the melee, and it was his barking that led people to the discovery of the bodies.
Really? Interesting. I've been by that location, and now it's just an empty lot. Not much there, but supposedly it's haunted. But, you know, every place in Chicago is supposedly haunted. So, good story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next one.
Awesome.
Look at the size of this monument. This is incredible. What's the story on this one?
Yeah, isn't this crazy? So this is actually an empty mausoleum, and I know at least last year it was up for sale. I don't know if it still is, for a cool $1 million if you want. So Erns Leman, who lived from 1849 to 1900, he established what we would call like the first department store. So it was called the Fair. So he was an immigrant from Germany, and he didn't have a lot of money like all the immigrants. And he opened a small jewelry store, but eventually he built it into an establishment at State and Adams in Chicago. And he began adding departments. So that's how we come up with the idea of a department store. So it expanded the store. Sadly, at the peak of his success, his health suffered, both physically and mentally. And then he started to spend money frivolously. And Brian, I know you were saying this too, that you read this. So he would like go up to people and just randomly buy their horse. He's like, hey, I like the look of that horse. Let me have that horse. And he would carry gems in his pocket.
Yeah.
I got the impression reading this that his wife was a little more socially conscious, and she was horrified by this. So in 1890, he was admitted to the Bloomington Asylum for the Insane in New York. And you know, then they had this beautiful mausoleum, and at one point up to 6 family members were buried here. But then his Graceland in Chicago became sort of the more fashionable cemetery, and his wife, I think some of her family were over there as well. So they built a new mausoleum, and they moved all the bodies that were here and they're buried in Graceland.
Wow, that's amazing. Look at the structure. It's just beautiful. You got those columns there. It almost looks like the Pantheon or something in Greece. Let's go check this out a little bit. Looks like somebody's been up here. There's candles up here. Somebody's been doing something up here, but beautiful. Look at this. The cornice. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah, so Brian, you can see up there, people do come to visit this. I believe that somebody comes up here and maybe they use this for some other purposes that are important to them. I haven't seen them. But it's held up beautifully when you think about it.
It sure has.
Yeah.
Let's take a walk around here.
So the vaults were actually underneath.
Correct. That's where the bodies were. And I know that 6 were here. I don't know if there was room for more. And you can tell, I think the reason why it's held up so well, the design is so nice. You can see like there's air vents. I don't know if that keeps it from deteriorating. I'm not an architect, but... And the cemetery does occasionally, like you can tell there's trees growing out of the top. The cemetery does take care of those periodically.
It reminds me of the Field Museum or the Museum of Science and Industry.
Yeah, that kind of style of architecture, that kind of Greco-Roman.
Okay, let's see what we have inside here, if we can see anything. A lot of nothing, which is what Amy said. There should be nothing, and looks like there's nothing. Let's go around the back here, see what we can find. Okay, we have a stairway. That's always a good sign, and a door. Alright, is the door open? That would be wild. I doubt it's open. Let's take a look here. Beautiful door. Nope, it's locked. I wonder who has the key for that. And there, if we can see inside there, a lot of nothing, but there used to be 6 coffins in there before they moved them, and now a vacancy. So if anybody has a cool $1 million they're willing to spend, come on, you can come and buy this. Interesting mausoleum. So our next monument is that of a little girl.
Yeah, this is Willam Hellwig, and she was born and sadly she died on her 3rd birthday. So she was born on September 22nd, 1881, and she died on September 22nd, 1888. It's really hard to read the inscription, but we know that it says that she is the granddaughter of the couple that are buried next to her, priests. So she died sadly on her 3rd birthday, and I'm sure, Brian, you see this in all the other cemeteries. You know, so many young children died then. In the 1880s, nearly 2 out of every 10 children did not survive to their 5th birthday. That's because we didn't have vaccines, and you know, there's diseases we don't even think about anymore that would take children in a family. You know, lots of people come to visit this grave because how striking that statue is, and of course time hasn't been kind to it, but you can see the details of her, you know, her dress, and then like so many of these statues, she's leaning against a broken column that sort of indicates a life cut short. But yeah, look at her little shoes and the ruffles on her dress. Many people, like I said, come to visit her, and often leave toys and flowers. Today she does not have any, so it's just our presence is our.
It's her gift. Right?
That's our gift. We're here to see you, Willam.
Yeah. Well, what's the story on this one?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most visited, besides the Haymarket, probably one of the most visited sites here, just because those statues are so evocative. So this is actually Lars and Eddie Schmidt. Sadly, they died just days apart from each other because of diphtheria. I think that what's so interesting about this, it looks like one of the children is wearing a dress. You know, they used to dress boys in dresses for several reasons. Of course, it's easier to change diapers if you don't have pants. Also, children were not really considered genders when they were very little babies back in that time, and it was just the fashion. I'm sure you've seen pictures of Ernest Hemingway in dresses. You can tell, and I'm actually going to move it, so you can tell people leave gifts for these guys. I'm going to move this just because it's cloth. Sorry to the person that left that. You know, these things are already deteriorated. Sadly, of course, yeah, and I think that's Eddie. Eddie is the younger of the two, so you know, poor, you know, Eddie's legs got broken off, like happens with a lot of statues.
Sure.
Now, I don't know, sadly, I can't tell. So you can tell that there's 2 other little headstones over there, which you see all the time for children, reclining cherubs or angels. I don't know if those are other children that died in the Lars family, or if, you know, the Schmidt family, or if that's just because Eddie and Lars got extra headstones.
Could be. It's interesting too, because I usually, for small children, you usually see the lamb.
Right. Yeah.
You don't usually see like cherubs or little babies.
And you know, and you can tell too that this must have been more elaborate at one point. Sometimes like it's like a pillow with like a fringe, but it's really worn away.
It sure has.
Yeah. But yeah, it's hard for me to read the. You know, I'm almost wondering if those are other children, but those might have been other children in the Schmidt family. But yeah, how sad.
It is. And you have this scroll here. Which there's some writing on it one time. Hard to read.
Yeah. But people leave a lot of gifts for Lars and Eddie, and it's very photographed. You'll see them. Yeah, and I'm sure you saw the detail on the front of his jacket with his little tie.
It's amazing.
And the buttons. Yeah.
Buttons and everything.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it looked like when it was first done.
Yeah. It's kind of boring because there's no headstone. And you had to chime in because I know you know something about Belle Gunnes as well, right?
Yeah.
So do you want me to go?
Well, I know she was the first female serial killer.
Well, we don't.
Supposedly.
Yeah, we don't know if she was the first. Probably the most prolific.
Yeah.
So she was born in 1859 in Norway. Supposedly she died in 1908. I have my theories. So she was born in Norway. She moved to Chicago in 1881. In 1884, she married a man named Mads Sorensen, which is a great name. I'd love to have the first name of Mads. It seems like they couldn't have children, but she adopted a neighborhood child. It was really easier to adopt children back then. In 1884, they owned a candy store, which burned down while only Belle and Jenny were in the store, and they collected the insurance. I think this is what like flipped a switch in Belle's head. So then shortly thereafter, all of a sudden they have 4 other kids, but nobody has seen Belle pregnant. And again, sometimes people I mean, maybe not abandon their kids, but would just give their kids to other people. But yeah, or sell them, exactly. But 2 of those babies died in Belle's care, and they happened to be covered by life insurance, which Belle collected. And the symptoms of those children could very much look like poisoning. Then they started to have financial problems. They had bought a house with the money from the candy store. So while they're having money problems, all of a sudden there's a fire in the house. Belle collects the insurance again. And then 3 months after that fire, Mads dies on one day when both of his life insurance policies overlap. So he had a life insurance policy. Belle says, let's get you more life insurance. And there was one day where they overlapped, and he just happened to die on that day.
Coincidence.
Right? Yeah. And the story was like, she said, he came home and he didn't feel good. So I went to the store and got him some, powder for him to take. And they're like, well, Belle, do you have any of that powder? No. Do you have the envelope that came in? No. So it was suspicious, but she was not indicted. So then she takes the money that she gets from Mads, and she buys a farm in LaPorte, Indiana. She moves there. She marries a man named Peter Gunnes. Peter has 2 children. Peter is out. 5 days after the wedding, Belle's home alone with one of the children. That child dies. And then a couple months later, Peter Gunnes is found dead in the house. Belle says that a meat grinder landed on top of his head. But unfortunately, Jenny goes to school and she tells people, my mama killed my papa. So then not too long after that, Jenny disappears. Belle tells everybody that Jenny has gone off to college in California, gone off to go to school. So then she starts taking out ads in newspapers, and the ad says she's a comely widow, so a pretty widow with a large farm, looking to join fortunes with a worthy gentleman. So men start arriving on the farm with their belongings in their trunks, and we have some of the correspondence. She would tell everybody, bring cash, sew the cash into your underwear, don't tell your family where you're going, and then we'll have a great time together. So these men start showing up, and they leave without their belongings. And Belle's like, I don't know why they're leaving their trunks behind. So one of the men that had answered these ads, and it's great because we have Belle's correspondence to him, and he shows up and he goes missing, but his brother starts to follow up. So her brother starts to follow up with the sheriff. He tells Belle, where is my brother? What's going on with my brother? Right before he shows up, Belle's house catches on fire and burns. So as they're going through the debris, they find in the basement the remaining children that were living with Belle and the headless body of a corpse of a woman. They never ever find the head. And people are like, well, the fire was so hot it burned her head off. Like, that's not how it happened. That's not what it happens. The man that went missing, Andrew Helgeline, his brother Ozzel shows up because he said Belle that he was going to come, and they said, we're so sorry, the house burned down, Belle is dead. And he's like, well, let me go through the ruins, maybe I can find something about my brother. He's getting discouraged, he's about to leave, and then he notices some depressed areas by the pigsty. And he says, well, what's that? And they start to dig. And they find the remains of what is probably around 40 people, including her daughter Jenny. So the speculation was that Belle? We don't know. They did excavate the body that's here. So the bodies that are here are Belle, her first husband, Mads Sorensen, and those 2 early children that died are buried here in an unmarked grave. They did excavate the grave to try to get DNA because they had the letters that Belle had licked. The DNA was too deteriorated. So I don't know. Who knows?
So was Belle's body that they dug up didn't have a head?
Nope.
Interesting.
Right?
So we'll never know
whether
that's really Belle or not. But we do know that's her husband and a couple of children.
Yeah. Whether they were her children, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a woman in San Francisco later on that had killed 2 men in a similar way with poison. They don't know if that was Belle. That woman died before people that knew Belle personally could come. But when you look at photos, there's definitely a resemblance. Belle was a very large woman. The body they found was not a very large woman. But everybody's like, well, when you cook a roast, it shrinks. I'm like, I don't know if that's, I don't know. And the remains, unfortunately, Belle must have had a lot of anger because the people were not only poisoned with strychnine, but they were also hacked very brutal. And she had experience as a butcher,
Yeah.
but yeah, they were dismembered. Yee, Belle Gunnes.
That's quite a story. Here's the next one. I thought this one was fascinating. Van Ever. There's a photo of a train there, and I'll let Amy explain more detail.
Read from my book. So this is Herbert Clark Van Ever, and also his wife, Carrie Ann, is buried here. He was born in 1861 and he died in 1894. He was working for the C&NW Railroad Company when the crown sheet, I don't know what a crown sheet is.
So I looked that up.
Did you? Awesome.
And you have the firebox that the coal goes in,
Uh-huh.
and it's actually the roof of the firebox.
Ah.
The boiler's above it. And he must have been in there, I'm assuming he was probably in there cleaning it out or something.
Yeah, it could be.
And it collapsed on him?
Yeah, so the crown sheet gave way, killing him. But as Brian noted, it's so interesting that they would put the instrument of his death on his headstone.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. So you'd have a firebox in there, and then you'd have this filled with water, the boiler. And of course you would boil the water, which would create the steam that would power the locomotive, but that was dangerous. I mean,
Yeah.
You're dealing with fire, you're dealing with high pressures, you're dealing with all that stuff, so.
Yeah, and in 1894, not a whole lot of OSHA regulations back
No,
then.
definitely not.
And I love also the symbolism. You get the Book of Life at the top, the tree trunk, so a life cut short, but at the bottom the growth that continues.
Yeah. Okay, now this is the grave of Emma Goldman.
She was she was called the most dangerous woman in the United States. The date of her death is wrong on the headstone. She actually died in 1940. Can you imagine making that typo?
That's quite an error, yeah.
Yeah, she was a lifelong anarchist, and she believed, so anarchists,
Oh, there.
yeah, so anarchists visit all the time and obviously
Yeah.
leave things for her.
Yeah.
So the anarchists believe that in the absence of organized government and organized religion, that people will form cooperative communities and work together. And she took that philosophy even further for personal. So she believed that you should be personally free to love whoever you want to, however many people you want to. She was dedicated to that cause. And she's actually buried, this is actually a communist plot. It's owned by the Communist Party. She was only briefly a communist, though, because she felt they had betrayed the ideals of anarchy and was very disillusioned. She was kicked out of the United States for protesting the draft for World War I. She was only let back in briefly to promote her autobiography, which is a great book. But when she died, she requested to be buried near the Haymarket martyrs who are here, because she said the events of the Haymarket were, that was her political birth.
Wow, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a portrait.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah.
And everybody around here, buried around here, they all are very similar headstones. These are all giants in the labor and humanitarian movement. This is part of, I'll do a plug for my tour. These are the people that I cover when I do my tour in the summer. But each one of these people are just so inspirational, and they dedicated their lives to worker rights and humanitarian rights.
Interesting. We're all here together.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you mentioned the Haymarket Monument.
So this is arguably one of the most important moments in labor history in the world. At the late 1800s, of course, it wasn't unusual for there to be a 60-hour work week, and there became a call for an 8-hour workday. And so the movement for the 8-hour workday was very much centered here in Chicago. And on May 1st of 1886, there was a general strike. It started off peacefully, and then there was a melee there was an ongoing strike at the McCormick Reaper plant during this movement for the 8-hour workday. One of our martyrs here witnessed armed police officers gun down unarmed workers, and he called for a meeting at the Haymarket Square in Chicago. During that meeting, somebody threw a dynamite bomb. We, to this day, do not know who threw that bomb. The 8 men that were accused and convicted absolutely did not throw that bomb, but they were convicted for their ideals. So it's a much longer story. I cover that in my in my tour. But the reason why the rest of the world celebrates May 1st as Workers' Day is because of the events here at the Haymarket. People come from all over the world. Many of them are shocked that Americans don't know this chapter in our history. It's almost kind of purposeful that our Labor Day is at the end of summer. The United States government did not want to add more attention to the martyrs. And interestingly, Labor Day is a result of the Pullman strike, also a Chicago historical event, and it was meant sort of to placate the workers at the time because the United States government had very violently shut down that strike, but they granted Labor Day. But the Labor Day in the rest of the world is May 1st.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Very interesting. So if you want to learn more about this, you're going to have to take one of Amy's tours.
Exactly.
Here at Forest Park Cemetery.
It's fascinating.
It is, and this has been fascinating.
Oh, and I'm going to point out too that this is one of the very few National Historic Landmarks in a cemetery.
Really?
And they did not pick the site. So the site of the actual bomb throwing was in Chicago at Des Plaines and Randolph. And the reason why they didn't pick that site is because it doesn't look at all like it did at the time, even though the alley is still there. And so since this looks exactly like it did when the martyrs were buried here, well, they were buried first in a crypt and then they put the monument. That's why they chose this as the historic landmark.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this
Sure,
tour
it was
today.
so fun.
Awesome to actually be with somebody that knows a lot more information than I do about a cemetery. So I really appreciate it.
Anytime you want to come back and hit other points in the cemetery, I know no other cemeteries like you do, but I know this one really well.
And for those watching, if you want to come out on a tour, once again, when are your tours?
So the first Saturday of every month from May to October, and then go to the Historical Society of Forest Parks webpage, and you'll see the other tours that are available.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, Amy had to leave us. Thank you very much, Amy, for that wonderful tour. Now I'm going to try to find the grave of my great-great-grandparents. I did contact Forst Home Cemetery. They provided me the location, which I have on this sheet here. Now, nobody's been to this grave in probably 50 to 60 years. I know it's one of these tube-like tombstones. Let's see if it's this one over here. Because I did see a photo of it. No, that's not it. We're looking for Landeck is the name. Landeck. There's another of those type of tombstones right here, and yep, this looks like it's it. My great-great-grandparents, they were German. They did not come from Germany, but their parents came from Germany. Fred Landeck, he died in 1906. I don't unfortunately know much about him. And there's Minnie, his wife, who died in 1954. And my father, who's with me, remembers him. Remembers his grandma, and said she was kind of a mean woman, but old German lady. And then there's another date on here, as you can see, 1897. So looking and find a grave, this was Henry Landeck, 1897 to 1921. So he was 24. I'm guessing it was their son. I don't have any details, unfortunately, about him or that history there. He obviously died young, but no details on that one. Well, thank you for joining me today. What a great walk. And as always, until next time, keep exploring.